Hey everybody, my name is Jim Frymer. I'm the festival director of Out on Film, Atlanta's LGBTQ Film Festival. We are celebrating our 35th anniversary this year with an 11-day film festival and some amazing films. Films literally all day. I'm so excited about it. One of the films that we love so much is the documentary Art and Pep, which looks at the titular Art Johnston and Pepe Pena, the owners of the iconic bar Sidetrack in Chicago. They're also civil rights leaders who have been fighting for LGBT equality for decades. Their activism is the focus of their struggle to live and love freely. This is an extraordinary documentary. We have the director of the film, Mercedes Kane, and we have the executive producer, Kevin Hauswirth. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, great to be
This-
here.
Very excited to screen in Atlanta.
Oh yeah, we are. I watched this documentary and then I kind of reached out to my programs and said, you have to watch this like now. It's so good. We loved it so much. But I guess my first question is, what made both of you want to make this film?
Well, it starts with Kevin. So Kevin, you want to
Okay.
tee up how you know Art and Pep?
Yeah, so Art is a bit of a legend in the Midwest and in Chicago for his civil rights work.
Sure.
And Pepe is the heart of this iconic bar. And so I think people like really know them in their sort of individual capacity. Art is always like on a soapbox, rabble rousing, politicking. But there's this love story between the two of them that has always kind of been their own personal thing. That was not part of what was on display. So Art has been a mentor to me since I was 21 years old, organizing frat guys for gay rights in college. And a friend of my uncle said, to Art Johnson, you should meet this kid. We met for a drink. It lasted for 3 hours. And the stories he has of 40 years of politics and horse trading and rabble rousing is just absolutely incredible. And on the backdrop of it is this, in the core of it is this love story. Art and Pep have been together for 50 years, and our community doesn't have a lot of love stories that have endured that long for reasons that are very obvious to a lot of us. So it was really important for us to tell this story. To say that they were reluctant subjects is a bit of an understatement. When I was talking to Mercedes about it, and it was Mercedes' idea to actually do a film, it was like, good luck. These guys don't want to, like, this is not a part of their life that they put on display. But Mercedes is very persuasive, and here we are.
Yeah, I mean, Kevin had mentioned, he was just like casually talking to me about some stories that are featured in the film that just felt so uniquely Chicago, and, just kind of this story that I don't think has been told about cities not on the coast and their fight for LGBTQ rights. And I immediately was like, this should be a documentary. And then when I did meet them, it's like their love for each other after all of these decades is just so just like tangible and just beautiful. And I was like, I have never seen that love story on a big screen in my life. So then we sat down with them and here we are.
So Kevin, you mentioned that they were reluctant. Mercedes, how did you persuade them?
They trusted Kevin's judgment in introducing me to them, I think, which was a big help. And I think just sitting down and talking to them and, I just had such a genuine interest in their story. And I, also expressed to them how important it is for people to see these stories on a big screen, especially younger generations who, don't know this rich history, and also haven't seen that kind of love story reflected back to them. But the thing that's interesting too is that even though we convinced them, they were fine with like the business and the politics, but as Kevin mentioned, the love part of it and their private life is something they really held dearly and kept private. They really did, even as these public figures. And it took a long while for us to really like build that trust. And actually COVID, weirdly as it was, helped with that, I think, because, we started shooting in 2019 and it was a kind of a different modern day angle. And then COVID happened and it really forced us sort of into this bubble with them. And we just became so close. I have 2 kids, Art and Pep are now third grandparents to them, third set of grandparents. And we just built this intimacy and trust that like, I don't know if it would have happened quite in the same way if it weren't for COVID. And, we kept trying to get them to get in bed with, get us to get in bed with them basically. And they were really hesitant, and I said to them, if we were telling the story about a man and a woman, we would show these intimate moments. And it's so important to be able to show that about your relationship. It's such the heart of who you are. And it took about 18 months really finally to get in there, but it was building that trust. And at one point, finally, when Art saw the first cut of the film, he said, the best thing I ever did was let you in bed with me.
No,
And
that's
so
great.
it's like, yes, we did it. We built the trust and we gave them something I think they feel proud of.
That's great. I was just amazed at, learning more about them. I mean, not just, as you mentioned, the longevity of them as a couple. I mean, 50 years is a really long time, but also they've been activists, decade after decade. I mean, can you sort of talk about, I guess some of their legacy and about all, and them being able to stay together for 50 years and also be, maybe unwilling activists.
Yes, and I think what's really part of the decades of this is like, here you've got Art, this guy from small town blue collar Appalachia, and here you've got Pepe, who escaped Cuba and has kept helping family members get out of Cuba. And they met at a gay bar in Chicago. And because Art and Pepe fell in love, they decided to open their own little space to be free, their own little hole in the wall queer bar. And because of that, they now had a job they couldn't get fired from for being gay 40 years ago. So when things start happening in the city, like people getting evicted because of their sexuality, when AIDS hit, there were very few professions where you could be visible and active and not get fired. And folks who worked in nightclubs and bars were one of those. And so because of that, Art was really the one that kind of got this like political bug. And Pepe was the one creating that space in the bar. And then you cannot pull apart the role that queer bars have had in our activism, that they would pack that bar with people on a Saturday night, and then Art would get up on a stage and get people going and take a political action. So they started with very sort of what we would consider basic human rights, like you can't get evicted for being queer by your landlord. And then when you ask Mercedes sort of what was one of the things that convinced them to do this film, because out of that activism grew our statewide LGBT group, Equality Illinois. And we recently passed a law that says you got to teach queer history as part of history in schools. And for what it would mean for Art to be that little kid in Appalachia, turning on a screen and seeing this love story and seeing themselves being valid and seeing that the triumphs of history are the triumphs of our people too, was so important for them. And Art was an educator. Like, he came to Chicago to teach. So I think there was a sense of making sure that history doesn't get lost and making sure that we as a community don't have the luxury of always learning our history from our family. We've got to get our history from other sort of places. And I know that's something that's very important to both of them.
They've been at the forefront of so many battles over the years. I mean, LGBT equality, civil rights, fighting for AIDS funding. I mean, and I didn't know their story, and I feel kind of bad that I didn't. But Mercedes, can you just sort of talk about, how this film, is introducing the work they've done for so long to people who really need to know their story?
Yeah, I think like kind of how Kevin mentioned, it's like the younger generations. So our crew was, almost all LGBTQ, like very diverse. And a lot of the younger people on our crew, like, had no idea, like they didn't hardly even know anything about AIDS. And it was a little shocking to me as someone who's a little older. But I would just watch them even on the set, like listening to these interviews and absorbing all of this. And that's like too, when the light bulb went off for me that like, this is so important. It's like, these are people who grew up in Chicago, who are queer, and they are like learning so much and being so moved by the stories that they were hearing. And so, I was just like, this is such an important film. And, when we premiered at Outfest back in July, Art said it so well that like this fight is not over, far from it. And that, it's time to continue galvanizing. And I think learning the tricks of the trade, if you will, or the battles that were fought are so important when you're moving this fight forward and continuing it. I mean, we know the climate today, right? And yeah, it's not getting any better in the immediate future. So I think it's just as important now as it ever has been, if not more so.
Exactly. Kevin, you largely addressed this earlier, but I was reading the press notes today, and I read a comment that really stood out for me. That says, while Art and Pep never set out to be activists, for them, inaction was never an option. Can both of you or one of you discuss that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of underrepresented folks, especially queer folks, feel that standing and doing nothing means your rights do not exist in many ways. So when, the accidental activism, and also this part of what Mercedes pointed to about the reluctant subjects, they got up and did the work because the work needed to be done, and someone had to grab the megaphone and shout. But they don't like taking credit for any of the work because it was a community, it was a movement. They played a role in a movement. And so there was this reluctance to making it about them, because it isn't about them as individuals, it's about the community and it's about the path forward, and it's how work gets done. So I think like one of the most obvious examples of inaction not being an option is when AIDS hit. And it was kind of being reported in San Francisco, kind of getting reported in New York, but Chicago wasn't writing about it. Like it wasn't, and this was happening in lots of cities. And as Mercedes mentioned earlier, the story of queer rights in America is largely told through the coasts. You know about Harvey Milk, you know about Stonewall, and you maybe know one or two other things. But the rest of the country, the South, the Midwest, are oftentimes just kind of omitted from the history of our people. And there's a lot of great things happening in those spaces. So it was even, and this Art and Pep tell this story in the film, their big eye-opening moment around AIDS was when they were traveling. They were on softball teams. They were on gay softball teams that traveled, and they'd be in these other places and people are talking about this disease, and it wasn't being talked about in the mainstream in these other places. So that's where you then had this activism that like people are literally dying around them. And if we're not going to take care of ourselves, then who the hell is? And that's kind of been in Art's soul his entire life.
Although them not wanting to take credit is a little problematic when you're making a documentary about them.
Yeah. You said something a moment that kind of struck a nerve with me, because when we think about LGBTQ history or all the significant moments, people automatically reflect on Stonewall, and there's obviously reflections on Harvey Milk, and it seems steeped in New York and California. But as you know, there's gay stuff going on. It's kind of the same thing. When the Outfest and Frameline and Newfest announce their schedules, the national gay press will go crazy about announcing them. When the Reelings and the Out on Films, there's not as much shit. But why do you think that is? Why is LGBT culture in America sort of focused on New York and California?
Question.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think part of it is like credit where credit is due. Yeah. Let's not underplay the significance of Harvey Milk, right? And Stonewall was really, really important.
Exactly.
But for every Stonewall in New York, there was something happening at a sidetrack in Chicago. There was something happening in other bars. And I think part of the through line, and this is articulated in the film, is that bars are oftentimes the anchors of the gayborhoods, or the queer enclaves that exist in cities. And we're seeing a dissolving of those enclaves. Yeah. I mean, you can't open up a queer publication or even mainstream publications now and not read some story about another queer enclave sort of dissolving. And that's problematic, because when we lose geographic density, we lose political power. And when we lose political power, don't pretend like these rights are just going to stay around forever. Yeah. Like these politicians are not supporting us just because they they adore us. It's because we have organized ourselves and we have organized power, and that geographic density and having a geographic hub like these queer enclaves is very, very important.
Yeah.
And I would argue, biasly, of course, that Chicago is one of the last queer enclaves. North Halsted Street deliberately and intentionally was designed to sustain and to be a fixture. And that's bars and queer-owned businesses and health centers and creating these spaces that centralize political power and cultural relevance. So I do think that sometimes it's just sort of the arc of how stories are told, and they start flashy, and then it's up to us to really push to fill in the blanks.
And, you know, and I would piggyback on that too, in saying that, like, because Illinois is such an island, it is so important. You know, it's so important for all of those states around it. And we interviewed so many people who are Sidetrack regulars, you know, who came from a Michigan and Indiana, had never been around anyone like themselves, had never felt accepted. And then they go to North Halsted and it's, you know, rainbow streets and bars that, you know, and places and health centers, as Kevin mentioned, and they felt immediately just like unease and an acceptance in a way that is so powerful and can be life-changing. So it's so important.
Yeah, I mean, at a time where there are a lot of gay establishments that are closing throughout the country. I mean, you sort of look at Sidetrack and all that Sidetrack has done over the decades, and say more power to them. And I mean, thank you for doing this. Mercedes, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about yourself as a filmmaker, because I didn't realize until we were sort of knee deep in doing this that you actually are living in Atlanta now.
Yeah, I am. Yeah, so I've been making films for, gosh, I don't know, 15 years or so.
Yeah.
And I've been working on this one since 2019. It was quite the adventure, like I mentioned, with COVID and everything else going on. I actually just finished a film that was sponsored by a company, but it was about HBCUs. And so we filmed it all in Atlanta and with local crews. And that was like really, really rewarding. And I learned so much, and it was great to, like, you know, work locally. So I'm hoping there's more of that to come.
Oh, great. Can you talk about, I mean, I lived in the area all my life, and I've been in Atlanta for, God, almost 30 years, and it's changed so much. I mean, because I remember back in my day, we'd have like a Driving Miss Daisy filmed, you know, one, and then like that would be it for 5 years. Nowadays, every Marvel film is in, and you walk around the corner and say, "Oh, is that Susan Sarandon?" It is. It's just a different area. But can you talk a little bit of Mercedes about, you know, being in an area right now where the proverbial wisdom used to be that if you wanted to be a filmmaker, you had to move, you had to live in LA or something. But can you talk a little bit about being in Atlanta and being able to live here as a filmmaker?
Yeah, I mean, it really is incredible. The film community, and also just the creative community. To be 100% honest, I didn't know a ton about Atlanta before we moved here.
Yeah.
And I just have been so, like, blown away by just the, like, layers of creativity and, like, interesting people and the art scene and the film scene. I mean, it's such a vibrant city in so many ways, and also a welcoming city. You know, I mean, so many people are transplants because they're moving here for film or creative fields. And so I think people are, like, looking to welcome you into the community, which has been so great. And same with the film community. I think COVID has made it a little hard, and, you know, it's getting better and better, but to, like, connect with people in person and, you know, but like I said, I mean, meeting and finding local crew to work on this film that I just finished has really been great. And I think is, you know, opened my eyes to all the talent here. And I know, you know, a lot of big budget films are shot here, which is not really my jam necessarily. I'm more of like the scrappy indie documentary filmmaker type. And I think that is growing in Atlanta. I think that's kind of thriving in Chicago more than any, you know, like a bigger city even. So that's been a little bit of a shift for me, but I think that's growing as more people are kind of moving here because there's more of a movie scene. So I think it's a really exciting time to be in Atlanta. And also the weather. I mean, compared to Chicago, I can't. I also didn't realize there was such a big LGBTQ community in Atlanta.
Oh yeah, it's huge.
And it's amazing. Yeah.
Huge. I mean, it's so diverse and spread out. So
and Atlanta's a little bit like Chicago in that it's an island too, right? Of, like, acceptance for people in the South. So I mean, that's incredible.
You've had a great festival run with this film. You had a wonderful world premiere at Outfest. I know you're doing a lot of other festivals this year. What is what's next for the film? Do you hope to eventually get distribution, or will this eventually be available on video on demand? What's the future of Art and Pep?
Yeah, so yeah, like you said, we're kind of like in the early stages of our festival run. We have we're going to be screening at Chicago International Film Fest.
Congratulations.
Will be really nice. Yeah, kind of a homecoming.
Yeah.
But we have a sales agent, Espresso Media, in the UK actually, and they've been with us for a little bit. They've been like huge champions of the film, and they're just great. So it's kind of parallel pathing as we're in the film festival circuit. They're out there introducing it to, you know, networks and streamers. So we don't know the home yet, but the hope is that it will land somewhere so it can be widely available for people to watch.
Oh, congratulations. I cannot wait for people to see this film here in Atlanta. And I'm sure that the Chicago screening is going to be amazing as well. So
Yeah, thank you. We're excited.
all right.
It's like the joy of making these is like you're in a little dark room, and when you finally get to share with people, it's just like the best feeling, especially also for Art and Pep, you know. I mean, it's like such an incredible, you know, they're in their 70s, and to just be able to have their life shared with so many people around the country is like a gift, I hope.
They're gonna be 80 very soon, and to see 50 years of their love on a screen for 90 minutes, like condensed into 90 minutes, is something I don't think either of them were prepared for the impact of.
I saw them last night at our opening night film for Bros, and I was really kind of manic, kind of running here and there. I didn't get a chance to say hi, but I'm so looking forward. I'm doing the Q&A for the film.
Oh, good.
So I'm really looking forward to it. Speaking of which, Art and Pep screens at Out on Film Saturday the 24th at 1 p.m. at the Midtown Arts Cinema. Following this screening will be a Q&A with Mercedes Kane and Art and Pep themselves. I'm so happy to share this and be able to do the Q&A for this. The film will also be streaming beginning on September the 25th, so you can watch this Q&A as part of the streaming as well. Kevin, Mercedes, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. Thanks for sharing this film. I cannot wait to share this with Atlanta. I'm looking forward to a great Q&A and having people learn more of the story that they need to know. I'm just amazed that they've been together for 50 years and just continue over the decades to just be activists and be out there fighting for our rights. So thank you for sharing their story.
Thank you for giving us a platform. We really appreciate it. We're very excited.
Absolutely. Y'all have a great day. Thanks so much.
Thanks. You too.
Take care.
Bye.